So the reason I'm in this is because after my PhD, me and my colleague Ingmar Bolin were given funding from the Swedish Research Council to take a look at evidence-based medicine. And we did, and it resulted in this book. This is Åsa's copy of it. It's a green book with these many faces. And the result of our research was pretty close to what Daniel was speaking about, that there is a large degree of interpretive flexibility when it comes to what this means, this notion of evidence-based medicine and evidence-based practice. And we also found out that this is a very important concept. There's buzz around it. It's a hot concept, but very little competence about what it actually means, how it's done. And that situation is always unhappy, unfortunate, because it lends, then the concept, if it's very popular, it will lend itself to abuse of power. So many I've spoken to have experienced a situation like this. Somebody comes in and says, we should do this. Okay, why? Because there's evidence. And then the discussion stops, because there's an authority to this notion. It needn't be a period after that sentence. There could be a comma. How do you say that in English? A comma. A comma. A comma. A comma. A comma. There could be a comma. There could be a continuing discussion about it. That could be a door open up for discussions. But very often it hasn't. So therefore we decided to start this master's program at the Faculty of the Human Sciences, which is unusual in the world. Usually it's in the Faculty of Medicine or in the Social Sciences faculty, in some case in Oxford, but usually in sort of medical sciences. And I think our take on it, because we're from theory of science at the Faculty of Human Sciences, is a little different from many other schools. Our perspective is that it's really important to understand and be able to deal with the things that Daniel spoke about. So how, for instance, is this area affected by the fact that it started in medicine and then spread to other places? For us, that's important, but not in the way that it is sometimes referred to. And Åsa, you touched on this. What we see is that in medicine there is sometimes it's an exaggerated belief in this notion. So there's a high belief in the notion, and sometimes sort of a simplification of it. In other places, such as in education and social work, you have the opposite case. You have a large resistance without people really knowing what they're resisting, and an increasing complexification of it. So you could interpret Daniel's presentation, or similar kinds of presentations, or my presentation for that part, or our book for that part, as saying, this is really too complex, we shouldn't be doing this. Because it can mean all these things, the many phases of evidence. That's why we don't think that it's too complex. We don't think that it's only a dangerous concept. We think it sort of points out an important point of improvement for medicine as well as education and social work. We think that the basic point should concern everybody. Is there research out there? Has anybody done what I want to do? Can they help me? That's the basic point, and that's why also I'm less interested, as a response to Eva. To me, I'm less interested in whether we call it evidence-based X or evidence-informed X, because really we're not moving in that kind of territory. It's not chemistry, so we're not separating really between different atoms or molecules here. We are moving sort of in a complex terrain, and we want to do something which is quite basic, but will require a lot of sort of good judgment. And sometimes these notions, and sometimes the sort of struggle for notions, fighting about notions, will obscure the cause. The cause that I think most of us actually share. Then I know Eva is working in a government agency where concept sometimes becomes very important, and so we've had a lot of discussions about this, and I have no quarrel with it as such. So this is an important aspect, and but this doesn't mean also, as also said, that I share the opinion that medicine is so easy, that it's just bodies, and that it's completely predictable or deterministic. What doctor will sign that description of medicine? I don't think nobody will do that. Sometimes there are cases that prove to be predictable, and that's great. But it's much more complex. And in education, there's actually more predictability, or ought to be, than we sometimes believe. I mean, we want our children to learn to read different books, but all of my sons and my daughter's classes, they have pretty much the same book. Some different levels, but they read the same book, and they do it in pretty much the same way. At the moment, my son is reading the same part of the book, the same chapter, for 5 times, because someone found out that it's good to repeat learning, repeat reading. So that's a method, and that's applied to everybody in the class. And for my son, we have to say, it's enough with 3 times, because you will wear out your interest in reading, because you're too good at this at the moment. You should devote yourself to writing. I mean, of course, there are individual adjustments all the time, but there are also the huge sort of benefits from having standards and not letting everybody invent their own education. So I think there is a sort of need to adjust our conceptions of these areas. Yeah, the great problems with evidence, because you see what's on the light post, you don't see what's outside. You have all these problems. Money is sometimes a problem when you have a large sort of incentives. We've seen that in the healthcare sector, where cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, my wife works with it, so I'm not against it, but there's been sort of huge economic incentives which have skewed the whole sort of marketplace or the healthcare sector in a bad way, which is also acknowledged by, I think, all parties. So my approach is from theory of science and from the lack of competence, and I should mention also that there is a lack of infrastructure within education, I think, when it comes to sort of getting the time to, I think some of you experience this, that there isn't the time or the space or the resources to do what you would like to do, and healthcare is a very good example there, an exemplar that could be sort of, in some senses, imitated. But my project is to increase competence, because that's where I see I can do a difference, and I can see that this is a problem. Then I mean practical skills. I mean very basic skills. Searching the literature, appraising the evidence, compiling evidence, using evidence, Simple but very difficult things, like you mentioned. You want to bring some new knowledge, some new method into a situation. How do you do that? That's a very sort of recognized problem in implementation science and in improvement science too. So different sciences working with this. Practical skills are necessary, but also critical perspectives. Orthodox views of evidence is there and has to be learned. I think you have to know what is the gold about the gold standard randomized controlled trials. Why is it gold standard? And what's the problem with it? Of course, you have to learn a pluralist view too. Other views of evidence that is usable in other contexts. Why do they have to combine? Well, because you have also in medicine sort of a discussion about real EBM, real evidence-based medicine, and rubbish evidence-based medicine. You have abuse of powers, you have misconceptions and misuses. And it's not enough to refer to complexity. It's not enough to refer to, well, it could be different. It could be viewed in a different way. That will paralyze organizations if you have too much of it. I'm so sad to hear that you can't do a PhD and then return to preschool because you're too critical. Our critique must never lend itself to paralysis, but has to be combined into sort of a productive, constructive, participatory role of our students. So if they learn a perspective, it should be for enlightening the workplace. How could it be different? In fact, how could it not just in another world where we had other resources or where new public management didn't exist, it should be like this. No, we live in the real world and we want to make real changes. So how can they be combined? And of course, I can't tell you this because it's complex. It's difficult. You have to register for a course or the whole program. Thank you. Goodbye. No, now I will just give some hints to what I mean by this combination. Yeah, I could mention something about how the program was developed. It's really more of historical interest. We work together with a lot of government agencies. We have now a close collaboration with the Swedish Institute for Education Research, Skolforskningsinstitutet, where they send teacher students to us, or teachers that study our courses and then try out findings of systematic reviews, which is a very interesting project. We're in the middle of it now and starting to see the fruits. So, and we can say something about who enrolled. Mostly part-time studies and people from all parts of the welfare sector. And that's a part of the point, that they meet each other and they see that, oh, these people who are my enemies, when we negotiate about resources or about patients or pupils or clients, this is how they think, this is their logical grounds. That's a really important part and fun part of the program. And they vary in ages. Methods and perspectives, tools and reflections relate continually to their workplaces, ordinary workplaces and work tasks. And you have this combination of professionals that meet each other. So those conversations, and I don't know how many training programs, how many educations in Sweden or in other countries, in how many other places do these professions meet around concrete problems and interpretations of science and scientific articles and implementation problems. I don't know. I think it could be unique. And if we're not, please tell me. Yeah, you know about the broad definitions. What's new about using research? Nothing in one sense. Or in another sense, there is something new. I claim that there's this proliferation of particular methods and tools, or what we call in the book formalizations. And formalization could be of different kinds. The point is that they are often outside of the body. And they are templates, or they are ways to structure searches or databases, things that you need to actually try and learn, and you have to talk to someone who has worked with them a lot to know how to do it. And the point with these formalizations is that you get increased transparency, you get some sort of reproducibility. For instance, when you do systematic review, you can follow the steps and you can see how this is done, and that also enables a better critique of it. So there are all these advantages of them. This is a formalization concerning internal validity. So at the top you have randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews based on randomized controlled trials. This is a staple within evidence-based medicine. And a very good staple, very good hierarchy, very dangerous hierarchy, because you might think that this study is the only thing that is worth anything. And if you read some government agencies' reports, SBU, for instance, this might be sort of the take-home message. And then the idea is that from these systematic reviews, you should get sort of guidelines and manuals. This is classic evidence-based medicine. You go from one organization where you have studied things scientifically, you do these reviews, and you take it to another organization. The particular version of sort of the classic evidence chain is that RCTs get this crucial role. I think you should learn that. You should know about how do you do this. In education, well, you don't have that many large-scale RCTs, but it's a good training, good scientific training to know how to find it, how to appraise it. Is it a good RCT or not? What's the risk of bias? And this is sort of an image of the strive within evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice, that by increasing these formalizations, you should minimize individual judgments. So you don't get too large variability between different hospitals or different schools. And of course, this hierarchy is sometimes very guiding in this strive for formalizations. What we claim in the book, and here comes sort of the critical perspective, here comes what we do about this in the program. In our book, we show that formalizations always interact with judgments in every part of the chain. For every formalization, you must improve your judgment. So your skills, your craft skills. But that also means that there isn't a contradiction between these formalizations and tacit knowledge, judgment, expertise, etc. It's in fact that they improve each other. And you can just think about it. The bad version is, of course, when you just rely on this and think that you don't need that. That's a misuse. It's an abuse of formalizations. But the other, equally, when you only rely on this and never externalize, formalize, standardize, in the worst case scenario, you just have it here in your stomach, the gut feeling, and it stays there, and nobody understands how good you are. So you need this dance between them. That's one of our main points. And so we push for that. And when we do that, we're not doing something which isn't already happening, for instance, in evidence-based medicine. That's happening continuously. Maybe what doctors need to learn is to acknowledge that this is what they're using. Need to learn to talk about it and recognize that this is it's an important part. The problem is when you don't talk about it, you don't really learn how to grapple with it. Okay? So you don't learn techniques and methods for how to improve tacit knowledge. It becomes and stays tacit, which is unfortunate. So we need to talk about it, and that's what we do. So this sort of movement is actually not just formalization, minimizing judgment. It is also the improvement and increase of judgment. Maybe it's a movement from minimizing individual judgments and the variability to more collective judgments, collectively shaped, formed judgments. So this means that the students will learn these techniques in this whole chain, but they will also practice how you can do it in each step of the way and discuss what this judgment amounts to. And to this judgment, we also add sort of a pluralist awareness, so that you don't just learn one technique, not just one way of analyzing an organization. You learn, for instance, not only RCTs, but what's called sort of outcome studies or registerstudier, where you don't have a selected population, you don't have the same kind of rigor. What does that mean for the whole chain? Of course, that has consequences for how you use the results. And similarly, you have a number of other ways to study these organizations and classrooms. You have, for instance, qualitative studies. What do they mean? How could they be used? What are their weaknesses? How do you combine several qualitative studies in meta-synthesis or meta-ethnographies? What kind of systematic review would you get from that? And what kind of instructions for the organizations? So a methodological pluralism, which I would claim, and this is one of my biggest claims, and please contradict me if I'm wrong, I claim that you have an unnecessary and large divide between different disciplines, at least in Sweden. So medical doctors, they hardly have any qualitative methods in their training, and in contrast, education, social work, they almost never work with quantitative studies. And they don't learn the crafts of actually searching and analyzing and understanding what can you use quantitative studies for. So that's why this is a very important part of the program, to get sort of students and practitioners that can look with both eyes and not just walk around and saying, well, that part of the world is really not useful. How do you know? Have you seen it? No, I haven't seen it, but it's... My teacher said that that's dangerous territory, and my teacher said that it's ideologically biased, and that you view humans as atoms, or you view humans as something amorphous, flummigt. And similarly, so complicating things even more, I would claim evidence basing is about how organizations affected by new knowledge. We have looked at this chain, which of course always starts in an actual practice, and then it's studied, and then it leads to some sort of compilation. But equally important is this loop. And it's not usually sort of regularly termed evidence-based practice, but it's very effective. It affects a lot of teachers, a lot of workers, practitioners in the welfare sector, audits, etc. How do you deal with that? Should you just see this evaluation and then run? Either hide or just do what it says, or could you have local and national, or could you actually use it in some way? But then you need continuous implementation support, and you need persons in the organizations that can understand RCTs or other studies. You need persons either in management or practitioners that can understand what is happening here, what kind of evaluation is being done here. think I'll stop there because my point, I've sort of made my point, and I won't be able to make any more of the points that I would like to make. So I would be really interesting to see if this raises any questions or ideas, or what do you think of this?